Welcome to Mormon Book Reviews, where an evangelical encounters the restoration. I'm your host, Steven Pynakker, and look who's back in the house, my newest co-host, Summur Rayne. Welcome back.
Hello, everybody. How are you doing? I'm excited to be here again, and I'm excited for this guest especially. I know I always say that, but this guest is near and dear to my heart, so I'm excited for this one.
Well, I'll tell you, Summur, you've really had the opportunity to interview some heavy hitters, from the Bishop Nick Jones to my pastor last week, who will be airing that soon. And now we are meeting your father,
My dad.
who happens to be a congressman. Summur, why don't you introduce your father to the audience?
Wow, what is there to say? My hero, all of my life, my father. He is Congressman Burgess Owens, someone who always told me growing up two things: I will never, ever, 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 never, never get into politics, and also, what is popular is not always right, and what is right is not always popular. So one of those things he's gone back on, but the other one, the second one, is one that he continues to emulate every day. And he is the congressman for my district, District 4 in Utah. And I'm just very proud of him, and I'm proud to have him today. And I'm proud for him to kind of share a story of his faith journey, and talk about where that began. I know a lot of it, obviously, but I'm sure I'll learn more today, and kind of where he learned about the LDS faith and where he is now.
So Congressman Owens and Summer's dad, welcome to the program today.
Thank you, Steve. And I'll say this: I'm extremely proud of Summur. I have 6 kids and 17 grandkids, and that truly is the hub of happiness for me. It really is. So when I come, and they're all here, by the way, in Utah. So when I fly back home from DC, when I say I'm coming home, I'm truly coming home. So really excited about this conversation, and hopefully I might find a few things here and there that Summur might not know about. We'll see as we go through the process.
That's great. Well, I think it's so fascinating because here you are, an African-American gentleman who actually, I believe, from my understanding, was raised Baptist, and then you actually converted to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints while a player in the NFL. And I just want you to talk about your background, where you come from, and a little bit about your faith journey, but maybe you talk about the church that you grew up in, and then talk about what ultimately led you to become a member and be baptized into the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Okay. Well, let's start off with my background, where I grew up. I was extremely blessed. I grew up in the 1960s. Those days of segregation, KKK, Jim Crow, but it's also an age, an era where my community was remarkably successful, remarkably patriotic, very faith-based. And because of that, I had a chance to see what it looked like for people to go through struggles, but always have this faith, this vision that things would get better because they believe in a God in heaven that would bless them the best they could. So I grew up in Tallahassee. Real quickly, I went to University of Miami. I was a biology and math and chemistry major, but I went there to play football to get that degree. It turned out that I found that I was pretty good at what I was doing. So I ended up being drafted to the Jets in 1973. Played for 10 years, ended up with the Raiders my last 3 years, back when the days when the Raiders used to win all the time. So in 1981, I was a member of the Super Bowl championship team. And then I left the NFL to, I mentioned that background. I grew up at a time, I just want to make this point because it kind of gives you an idea of the context of, I think, where I see ourselves moving forward as a country, as a nation, and particularly as my race. And when we talk about a country that is based on the concept of becoming a more perfect union, I've lived it. And so I grew up at a time when, because of the foundation, the tenets that my community believed in, basically, and I say this, my community, but every community also, the Italian, the German, the Asian, it was a place where, first of all, my dad was a return from World War II, so very proud to be American. And every single community, even though we might not have been assimilating at that time, we all felt the same way about being American. So we believe if we can win, if we can go through meritocracy and win, we can gain the respect of others. And the tenets that we all believed in, every community, which made our country the country of moving toward a more perfect union, was faith, the family, the free market, and education. And my community was one of the best at that point. We led our country in the growth of the middle class. Men matriculated from college, men committed to marriage, percentage of entrepreneurs, and that's from the 40s up until the late 60s. So that was in context of the environment I grew up in. I was taught as a young man, if I wanted to be successful in life, I want to look back and realize that life was a good thing, that I was succeeded. It was real simple formula. You love to learn. You love God, country, family, respect women and authority. And we had a dad in the household. Most Black Americans, over 80% of us, had dads in the household that taught us that and helped us make sure we stayed true to that. So that was the environment I grew up in. And because of it, because my family was very faith-based, I remember being baptized around 8, 9 years old in the Baptist church. And it was something I remember even to this day, because it was a decision I made sitting in the pew. My mom and dad did not ask me to stand up. I stood up and went to the front and decided I want to be baptized. So I knew early in my life, there was a connection with happiness and understanding there's a God in heaven and doing your very best to follow what he wants you to do. And I'll say this too. One of the things that I look back on that period is the decision we make, the courage we have is based on the faith we have that everything's going to work out, even if it doesn't appear to be at a particular point. If you stay true to your values, stay true to what you think, as you've been trained and taught to be the right way to do things, that it's going to work out in some fashion. And I'll say this as I look back on my life, decades later, Heavenly Father has a perfect plan for every one of us, a perfect plan. We say, and once we understand that and begin to count our blessings, then we'll start to realize even some of the toughest times we go through have been for our good. So that being said, I don't know if you guys remember the movie Remember the Titans, but that was a movie that was a movie that depicted my high school experience. I was one of 4 Black athletes that went to this particular school, and it was at this particular school that we had. I had some very experiences, pretty cool experiences. One was there were some good teachers. I was trying to figure out how can we pull together these different races. We hadn't experienced experiences together. We were not really liking each other very much because our parents were taught, particularly the white kids, the parents had taught them not to like us. So there's a lot of contention. There was this one professor or one teacher decided they're going to try to pull us together by putting together a club. The club was called the Interracial Club. It wasn't science, it wasn't biology, it wasn't soccer, it was the Interracial Club. And these are kids from all the backgrounds that got together just to talk about what we had in common and to do things together. One of the things we did together was to go to different churches. So I remember inviting all my white friends to come to a Black Baptist church to see how we did things. And it was a cool experience for them because we worshiped in a way that they weren't quite familiar with. But I enjoyed doing that. I don't remember the other churches I went to other than one. There was somebody that was actually a member of our club, that was a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I say that because we were invited to go to this church. Now, I knew nothing about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The teacher, because he wanted to make sure I felt comfortable, kind of gave us an idea that should be very, very, that we're going to do this, even though, and even though he didn't know if I was going to be comfortable with it, but we decided to go and make this happen. And as it worked out, the only thing I remember is walking up the steps and seeing these 2 young men with little badges on their chests. These are missionaries. Now, so I'm just saying that was my 10th grade. That's my first year being exposed to this particular faith. I was one of those guys that once I went off to college, I began to kind of drift away from my righteous teaching, my religious teaching, and just kind of felt as I began to look around that I could probably pull this off. I just try to be a really, really good person. I didn't really think I needed a religion. I could just be a good person and things will work out. And as we all know, those of us who understand the way life is, you have to have a North Star at some point. You can't, you can wander through the wilderness, think you're going in the right direction, but you have to have some place, a reference to know that I'm off track, I'm on track. And that comes down to believing that there's God in heaven and finding a faith that allows you to understand what it takes to stay on that track. So I kind of went into that world for quite a while, for a few years. it was interesting because the year that I got to the Raiders, this is the 8th year of my career. I've been with the Jets for 7 years. We had summer, and we decided a couple of things. I just won a Super Bowl championship. Was a team that was respected. I was in a position I was respected, making good income. And what I realized is there's still something missing. I wasn't quite feeling the peace that I wanted, that I thought really success would get me. And we also had summer. And so my wife and I decided we are going to find something that gives at least my kids a chance to have that foundation that we had. Now, I grew up as a Baptist. My former wife grew up as a Catholic. We didn't want to go in either one of those directions, so we just looked everywhere. And so we found a faith that we had Summur sprinkle and as Episcopalian. So we didn't went that direction. And then the other thing that happened is this. For the 3 years I was there, I had a chance to get very close to one of my former players, Todd Christensen. I knew Todd was a member of the church. I didn't ask him any questions. I liked him, and I did not want to like him. So I decided we just wouldn't talk about religion. We talked about everything else. Our kids were the same age. Just good, solid people. At that time, I don't know if you guys remember the Raiders, Steve, in those days. The Raiders were a very wild group called the Motley Crew. And so it was a wild bunch of guys. And I didn't relate to the way they spent their time during their off time, but I related to the way Todd and Kathy spent their time around family, doing things like that. So we got to be very close friends. And over the next 3 years, I got to trust him, like him. I knew nothing about his religion other than the fact that we were in the one place in Oakland, the one place in the entire NFL that if I looked up in the hills, I could see the Oakland Temple. So it's a beautiful place. You could see it every day in practice. Had no idea what went on there. But again, it's a curiosity process. So as I got closer with Todd and Kathy, we just became real good friends. That's where I spent my time. Matter of fact, the year that I decided to join the church, we were having a strike, an NFL strike. This was in '82. And my family was back on the East Coast. I was a player rep, so I was actually in Oakland talking with the players around Thanksgiving, explaining what's going on, where we were with the strike, and what it would take to make sure we got it into the strike. And I was invited to go to have Thanksgiving. I was gonna be by myself. I was invited to go to Thanksgiving with one of my good buddies, Matt Millen, who's a linebacker, very, very close friend of mine, and Todd and Kathy. And I think because of the relationship we had as family, because I was really, really close with Matt. Matt was probably one of my best buddies. But because of the family dynamics of Todd and Kathy and my wife and I and our kids, I decided to go there. So decided to go Thanksgiving with the Christensens, sat down for dinner, and there was a knock at the door. And these two young men came in, and they had badges on their chest. And by the way, I was getting into business, and I had a real focus at remembering names. My goal was to figure out how I could remember names. I was really into it. So they walked in the door, and I was introduced to them. I said, guys, it's gonna be so easy to remember your guys' first name. It's both Elder. And I really thought their first name was Elder. So of course, they smiled and laughed like you guys are doing right now. And I continued to call them Elder. So we sat down at dinner, did not talk all about the church, did not talk about religion, just had a good time. But then after that, we went downstairs and again, did not talk about the church, but we did talk about something that I was very interested in. I was at a point where my conservative values were beginning to kind of bubble up. I believed very much in the family. I saw that within my community, the destruction of family, the destruction of manhood and what men were doing and not doing, the leadership, the commitment. And so we started talking about those topics. And I was, 31 years old at the time. These young men were 20, 21 years old. And I was so impressed with the feedback, with the insight they were giving about things that were very important to me at the time. And so I remember making a phone call later on that night to my wife saying that I just met some really sharp guys, I tell you, were just sharp as tacks. And I didn't think I was going to see them again, but I was just impressed with them. So the strike ended. We went off to play in Atlanta, to play a away game in Atlanta. That Sunday, my wife was invited to go to to a Sunday session, Sunday church with the Christensens. She enjoyed it so much that when she came to pick me up, she said, well, I just went to church with Todd and Kathy. How about we go to church with them? Now, you have to keep in mind, we just won the big game against Atlanta. I was going to say yes to anything. We were so excited about where we're heading. So I said, yes, let's do it. So I went, and here's something that I think I always look back on when I talk about the perfect plan. Keep in mind that we play on Sundays. The only time we do not play on Sundays is a Monday night football game. It just so happens the following week, and not every team gets a Monday night football game. It just so happens that the following week, we had a Monday night football game in Oakland, which allowed me to have Sunday off. So the only time that I could go to church that entire year, I was able to go the following week. So I went, started having conversations, and decided to take the lesson. Let's understand what this church was all about. Let me just go back about 4 or 5 years before this, because I now look back on what was it that had me so interested in understanding the tenets and having questions that I had at the time. We have a very close family, and at the very hub of my family is my mom. My mom was the one that we always kind of stayed in touch with to find out what everybody else was doing. Dad was a disciplinarian. Mom was our friend. Whenever we had our issues during our upgrowing, we'd go to mom and have conversations with her. And about 4 years before Mother's Day, I was in New York. I had planned on calling mom to wish her happy Mother's Day. She was in the hospital at the time, and she was supposed to be out the next day. So I figured I'll just wait. I wasn't able to talk with her that night because I had an event. I think I called the next morning. I called the next morning and found that she had just passed away. Totally unexpected. No one ever thought this was going to happen in our family. The first time it ever happened, and it left a really big hole. It was probably one of my darkest moments early in my life, because I didn't understand, somehow something like that could happen. And I had questions I didn't know. Where is she? I mean, what happens? And all those questions that many of us ask that leads us to faith, I began to ask for the first time. And I just didn't have many of the answers that I was looking for. So that was kind of the place where I was. Of course, going through that process. Matter of fact, what I had done from that year until the end of my career, May the 11th, every single year, I would begin my training. So I dedicated every year from that point on in my NFL career to my mother. And I look back later on and found out because of that commitment, my third year in the NFL led to many of the success I've had, because I stayed focused through that process. So that was just kind of the backdrop. So when I would start taking lessons from the elders, I had these questions about what happens. The idea of families being together forever was a very, very attractive concept to me. The fact that everyone, whether we see and hear about Christ on this earth, will hear and see and hear about him at some point in the next phase of our journey. That things like that really caught my attention, and because of it, I just wanted to know more. We were one of those families, matter of fact, when the elders were saying, well, listen, let's get together another 3 or 4 days and discuss the next lesson. We were the family that said, no, why not tomorrow? So we were very anxious, and that's the way it went. It went that way until we decided to get baptized. And here's something, whether it be in my faith, in life, one of the things I've come to understand, if you're going to make a decision to make a real game changer for good, something that will help you on a track that gives you the best of being yourself, the adversary will step in. That's his goal: destroy hope, destroy your trajectory of doing good things. And at that point, I remember after giving a date for baptism, a couple of days before, I had these major concerns. And the concerns were very simply this. Why is it that Blacks could not have the priesthood up until about 6 years before I was taking these lessons? And I didn't have these answers. I didn't have a testimony of the Book of Mormon at the time, so I was going through the Holy Scriptures, couldn't find it there, doing a lot of prayer. I stayed at probably 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning trying to get these answers, and I just couldn't get them. So my wife called Todd's wife and said, get Todd over here. Burgess is having some real issues. So he said, she said it this way: Satan's coming after Burgess. I'll kind of cut to the chase. So anyway, so so Todd comes over the next morning. We have practice around 10. He came over around 8 o'clock with all these books under his arms. We're going to have this intellectual conversation. And what I found out about the spiritual aspects of our progress, it's not about logic. I mean, we want to read, we want to think, we want to really search, but it's really about the spiritual aspects that brings us to where we get heartfelt answers. So by the end of our two-hour lectures, I said, Todd, thanks, but it's not working, buddy. It's not happening. So,
and real quick, if anybody who knows Todd Christensen or met him, you can imagine him coming in with 2 packs of books to just have a sit down talk, because he was one of the smartest people I'd ever met. But I remember my dad just saying his vocabulary, and he was very intellectual. So Todd wouldn't be the first one to say, let's pray about it. He would say, let's read all these books and then let's pray about it. So that just to interject that really fast, that was Todd.
And I tell you, I appreciate it. Todd passed away a few years back, but he was the person I needed to have in my life. He's a good friend, very, very intellectual, as someone just mentioned, and very committed to being the right example. Matter of fact, there's a little side note. He wonders, after the NFL, after it's all said and done, after he got into his career as a radio and TV announcer, he wondered if he had not made a mistake of, instead of playing NFL, going on his mission. And I was one of those guys that said, Todd, thank goodness you played NFL, because if you had not, you and I would not be sitting here, would not be the friends we are. So that goes back again to that perfect plan Heavenly Father has for us. So so we went to practice. I was still having concerns. At that point, I decided that maybe I wouldn't get baptized after all. Let me just say this also as a little side note in terms of the way I was trained and taught. I'm so proud to have been raised by my dad, very principled guy. He taught us to be a leader. So there was 2 things I was struggling with. I was very, very proud of my race, very proud of my where I came from, and I could not understand why this phase we had gone through, what that was all about. At the same time, I've always believed if it's right, you do it. It doesn't matter if people like it or not. It doesn't matter if people agree or not. If it's right, you do it and just stand up and fight for it. So this is where I was. I felt it was right. Same time, I was trying to figure out why could this have happened. And so anyway, so I didn't have the answers. We had that Friday, 2 days later, we had a dinner with the mission president, and we were sitting there just having dinner with him. And didn't talk at all about the concerns I had. I probably knew that, I'm sure he knew that I was having them, but he turned to us and said something that changed my life's trajectory. And I say this all the time. He says, it's interesting the way the Lord works. He gives you enough to take the first step. He asks you to take the second step on faith. And that one phrase changed my entire life, because I didn't have the answers. But I felt in my heart it was the right thing to do. And I was given the first step that I needed to take. And I was going to take it on faith. And so I took that step on faith. We were baptized. My wife and I were baptized on December 31st at 10 p.m. And later on, I said, wait a minute, who gets baptized on New Year's Eve at 10 p.m.? This is crazy. So I thought maybe I had gotten it wrong, until I ran into my missionary right here in Utah. So yeah, bro, that's what happened, because you were leaving the next day to go to LA to play a football game, and you wanted to get baptized before the end of the year. And so that's what happened. And by the way, keep in mind, I was a Raider at the time. It was packed. I thought all baptisms were packed this way, but no, I was a Raider, and as about 4 or 5 of my teammates that also they're not members of the church that came to support me. It was just a remarkable opportunity. So that was the beginning. I began the 1983 as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and what's interesting, I still did not have the testimony that I needed to have that's led me to where I am today. I just knew on faith I had to take that step to begin the journey. Well, what happened is it was one of my better years. I had led the team in interceptions that year. I was an all-pro. I was going into a free agency season. And yet, as I got into the year, a couple things happened. One was I had a business that I was very excited about, that I figured maybe it's time for me to take that move. Two, I started going to church in New York, and I did something. I was asked to do something that really made a difference. I was asked to teach 14-year-old kids. To me, that was out of my comfort zone because I didn't know what to teach because I was just learning myself. But I realized in the process of learning what to teach, I gained my testimony. And I remember at a point I realized this is true. The concept is right. It is it is something that's going to, I believe, benefit my family, benefit anybody I can chat with, and it's a true Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So that being said, in the equation of that, decided not to play another season, there are a couple things. Number one, my business, the projection. Number two, the fact that I was 10 years in NFL and it was not as fun as it was when I was first year in NFL. It's getting a little bit old. And number three, we're moving from Oakland to LA. And with this new faith I did not want to, I didn't want to take my family into LA and leave this, I think I would say cocoon I was in at the time, this learning I was in, this faith building process I was in. And so those three factors kind of wove themselves into a decision I decided not to go another season. One of the best decisions I could have made. Because of that decision, again, I was able to continue to grow my faith. We were able to start that business that 9 years later failed dramatically. And that dramatic failure of a business that I had so much faith in. See, what I thought when I was coming out of NFL, very cocky, by the way, I felt anything I worked hard enough at, if I put everything into it, it was impossible for me to fail. Well, I realized about business, you can have a lot of energy and effort and money to put into something, but you also have to have a good idea. It has to be a good idea. That has to fit in there somewhere. So 9 years later, the business failed. I went from a beautiful home on Long Island, pool in the back, beautiful cars, to a one-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn just for a few months with 4 kids. In the daytime as a chimney sweep, at night as a security guard, trying to figure out what in the world, how did this happen, number one, and what am I going to do next? And I remember standing in that basement apartment, looking out that bottom window, hearing gunfire outside, and thinking, how in the world could this have happened? And in my mind came this thought: this is for your good. It's going to work out okay. This is for your good. And about maybe 6 months later, I crossed paths with a friend of mine 5 hours away at the DC temple. He was going out, I was coming in, and hadn't seen him about a year. Somebody I'd introduced to the church about 4 or 5 years before. He was a bishop at this time. And he says, Burgess, what you up to? And I said, Dana, that's exactly what I'm trying to figure out as we speak. And he says, well, listen, this is on a Saturday. Now keep in mind, 5-hour trip to get there. We both lived on Long Island, had no idea either of us was going down. And I'm running into him as we're walking in and out of the temple. And he says, well, listen, this on Saturday. On Monday, I'm working with WordPerfect. There's a company out in Utah, software company. They have these positions that's closing down on Monday. I said, Dana, you reach out to them on Monday, tell them I want that job. And that was what gave me the opportunity, that position, to not only find my feet, find some traction, get into a career that lasts another 25 years, a corporate sales executive, and also allowed me to raise my family in the Philadelphia area, where they were able to prosper, to have good friends, to really take advantage of what we wanted to train and teach them. And it was actually just to take another step, because of the way that they were able to be raised, the ability to me to continue to grow in my faith. I made one decision when they all left high school. I said, guys, you can go to any college across the country as long as you start the first year off in Utah. Now, I did that because I wanted them to have this experience being away from home, but yet still having the environment that they were raised in. So they all came out, and none of them came back to Pennsylvania to live. I was thinking I would send them out there, they'd come back home. I still had their bedrooms all set up and ready to go when they came back, but they decided to stay out here. And because they stayed out here, each one of them in their own time came out about 10, 12 years later, realized everybody's in Utah. So we decided to follow them and come out this way about 10 years ago, And it's the best decision I could have made. So again, when I kind of went through a lot of little things there, but at the end of the day, it points out to me that Heavenly Father has a perfect plan. I'm now no more than a 5-10 minute walk from a temple, and I'll be going there tomorrow morning. It's just, and more importantly, I'm 45 minutes away from all my kids. It has truly been a remarkable dream come true for me. And of course, doing the things we're doing now, I'm now, as Summur mentioned, I'm a congressperson. It's a state that has tremendous values that the rest of the country needs to be able to emulate. And so I'm glad to represent a state that really represent what I grew up in Tallahassee in the 60s. And so it's pretty easy to stand very strong on those principles. So,
Wow. Well, I have to say there's a
That's
lot to unpack there.
There's a lot, and I saw Steve's
first-
face when you said chimney sweep, Dad, because Steve did not know that.
Did not know that.
Security
That's
guard.
crazy.
So I saw his face, and I was like, I can't wait for him to be able to ask about that.
Well, there's so much to unpack, and I find this, first of all, honestly, I think you should throw your hat in the ring for the U.S. Senate, because I think you do really good as a doing filibusters in the U.S. Senate. But but I want to say that what a fascinating story and a journey that you went on, and also on your mind, how you're seeing is that as you tell the story and you're able to look back at it, you can see the hand of God, of Heavenly Father, directing your path where doors were shut. He opened doors for you and gave you opportunities, and he brought people into your life at the moments that you needed to have that. So it does, and so looking back at it, you can see the providential hand guiding you throughout your entire life, which I find to be very fascinating. And I have to just give a little context here. So folks, you have to understand that the part of Florida he grew up in the 1960s was what was called Dixiecrat country. That is the area that George Wallace, who was the segregationist governor of Alabama, carried out that area, that part of Florida, almost won the state of Florida back then when he ran as an independent candidate in 1968 against Nixon and Humphrey, and carried a bunch of southern states, and he ran on a segregationist ticket. So this was hardcore, the racist, Florida. I love the environment you were raised in, that you had a stable 2-parent home, you had a community that had values, and church was at the center of it. So you can see the value in all that. And I can also see why you see the value in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, because it emulates those same types of values that help make you the man that you are today, in being raised in a Black man in a Baptist church in the Deep South. And then I just think then to hear your story about playing football in NFL, and it's an amazing thing, and end up with all the teams that do not share your values in many ways, it's the Oakland Raiders. Just win, baby, right?
Can I say this one thing about the Raiders that you appreciate, Steve? You're right. It was a place, I think, I guess called kind of represents America, the place of second chances. These are guys that have played on many men have played on other teams. If they're too wild, too crazy, too rambunctious to other teams, it's just right for the Raiders. And the only prerequisite that Al had was you just win. You come, you put everything on the field, and you do that, everything works out. In terms of context, for that period that I grew up in, one of the things that I look back on now, my first exposure to white Americans wasn't until I was 16 years old. So you get an idea. My whole foundation was based on success in a community that I grew up in that gave me these hopes and dreams I could do anything I wanted to. So it is an amazing thing to see that. One other thing that I think, as I talk about our country being a more perfect union, back in those days, Steve, you might be too young to remember a movie called Guess Who's Coming for Dinner? Do you remember that?
It's Sidney Poitier.
Yeah, Sidney Poitier. It was a 2-hour movie, packed in. It was about a couple sitting around a table, Sidney Poitier and his white fiancée sitting around a table, and talking about the fact they want to get married. For 2 hours. And that was such a big deal because in those days, in the 60s, that was just taboo. People weren't doing it, but our country kind of was interested in how can that come to fruition. Well, here I am now with 6 kids, and my family is represented Black, white, Hispanic, American Indian, and Trinidadian. My grandkids call each other cousins, and it's amazing how we've come to this place in our nation where we're seeing each other the way that God wants to see us. And I think as we develop our faith should lead us to that point where we look at each other from the inside out, not outside in. And those of faith should always remember that. If you can't get there, then you have to really check your faith. because we should see each other the way God does. If we do that, then believe me, we are colorblind. We accept each other, even we might agree, not agree on how we worship God. We still accept and embrace each other because of the character we all might have, and that we can trust each other in that regard.
You know, it's fascinating because you had mentioned, so I just wanted clarification here. Are you saying that the school that you went to, the movie, the Remember the Titans, is that's based on your school in your story?
No, it was not my say. It was
but it's similar.
my era. It was my era.
Very
Yeah,
similar.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, very similar. Okay. I
Yeah,
thought
no,
that, okay. Very interesting. And, you know, this is a question I have for you is that, you know, of all people, that when you consider the world that you grew up in with the segregation and the racism, doesn't seem like you have any anger or resentment towards white people at all.
No, I don't, because we weren't taught to in those days. We have to remember what we're experiencing today is very different. We're experiencing today what we got rid of back in the 60s. We have always been a country that continues to want to become our better selves. And I'll say this, up to a few years ago, we were getting there. When I was raising Summur and her brothers and sisters, they had friends all over the place, and race was not the big issue. We're at a different place now. And that's why we have to understand, those of us who have faith, we're under attack. We have an ideology that hates everything we stand for. The idea of faith, family, free market education is under attack. And the way that they do that is by separating us, by making sure that we look at each other, not the way God does, not the way our country and Constitution was designed, but looking at each other from outside in and judging each other based on that. So I was raised, my family taught us, don't hate anybody, just go out and beat them. You know, work harder, run harder, study harder. And believe me, you will command respect if you do that. And don't do to other people what we don't want them doing to us. We understood what it was to have somebody look at me and decide I was not intelligent enough. I was not good enough. I was, with all those things that happen when you have a generation teaching hate, and we gotten away from that. So no, I'm thankful I grew up when I did. I'm thankful I had a chance to teach my kids the way I did. America has come back to recognizing, let's go back to our faith and do it and look at each other the way God does, for sure.
Well, fascinating.
If I could
Yes.
also say really fast, the way that my grandfather was very much a point my dad just made about don't hate them, just beat them. That was my granddaddy. He was very much about don't expend energy on hating, but this is the real world. This is real life. And we make sure that you are the best. So back then in the 60s, when you see, I mean, my dad and I have talked about this all the time, but with Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, you always saw them in suits. You always saw them present themselves in the best way possible, because it's not that it wasn't a reality that there was inequality happening, but the solution to that in a lot of their minds was be the best. I know when I walk in, I'm not going to be looked at as an equal, so I'm going to be even better, so that an equality thing is not even thought of. It is, wow, this is the best person for the job. And my dad also discusses a lot about the NFL and sports back then. It was all about, it wasn't affirmative action, right? You had, if you were the best, the team wanted you. Al Davis was, and my dad could speak about this as well, but he was a pioneer when it came to looking past race.
Oh yeah, Art Schnell and yeah, that's right.
Well, you look at even their Super Bowl team. You had Tom Flores, who was Hispanic. I mean, it was across the board. Al Davis was one of those who said, "I don't care your religion, your race. If you are good, just win. Let's get out there." And there weren't a lot of owners that did think that way. So I do want to put that out there. I think we're in an age that we kind of forget. There was a time, especially in the NFL, where certain players, if they were Black, could not have certain positions. And my dad grew up in that era, right? Dad, I think it was, you couldn't be a quarterback because it was a thinking position.
Well, that's why Warren Moon had to play in the Canadian Football League during that time.
Exactly. You know, it's interesting how we kind of forget that, and it's so important to remember to see how far we've come. But no, positions when I came out of college, center, middle linebacker, quarterback, free safeties were white positions because they were thinking positions. So keep in mind, and that's why it's so important that we do remember history. It's because we can see from there how far we've come. And as we understand how far we've come, there's no country that does it the way we do. My teammates now, the guys I played with, we call each other brothers. It doesn't matter what our background is, even what our politics is right now, because we have that connection. So that I think, and that's why we talked about earlier when I first started. That's why I appreciate what you're doing. We should be finding those places that we find things in common. The most powerful 3 words in the history of mankind is what starts our institution, our country, we the people. When we find things in common, find things we can forget all the extraneous, all the differences. Like football used to be that way, the military used to be that way. Then we began to melt into this culture that doesn't care anymore because we want about meritocracy. So anyway, that's so important. That's where I was raised that way, and I'm so thankful I was raised by that generation of people that believe that way for sure.
No, I just wanted to mention too, folks, that because this is an election year, we are going to an extended invitation to who will be the eventual Democrat nominee. And if there's any other third-party candidates are going to run, we're going to invite them to come on the program to also share their faith journey too, in the interest of fairness and bringing different people to the table. And I would love to have the congressman's daughter interviewing them as my co-host as well, to show that we can all get along and talk, especially in these tumultuous times where we're so divided. And it saddens me so much, my friend. Oh my gosh, when I first started this channel, God placed me, it's kind of a vision, I would say, but he placed me on one side of the street with our group of people holding our signs. And then he pointed out to the other side of the street where the people that were opposed to us, they were holding their signs. And God went to me and says, no matter what, even if it's somebody that you totally disagree with them, so always remind yourself that they are fellow image bearers. They are my children too. And don't let their politics and their positions and their beliefs and their faith or lack thereof get in the way of you having a conversation with them and building bridges. And I think it's a beautiful story about your life, because now you actually lived it. It's actually a lived experience. It's not a theoretical thing, that you actually lived it, accomplished it. And then amazingly, you end up as a congressman from Salt Lake City, which would have been unimaginable just a few decades ago, a Black man elected to U.S. Congress in Utah, which is a beautiful story. It's a story of redemption. It's a story of forgiveness. It's a story of reconciliation. It's a wonderful thing. And I think it's just, your life beautifully illustrates about what is so great about America.
Well, and here's what I want to make a point of. We all have a journey. We all have a place in which Heavenly Father is going to use us for His good. But my story is not unique. The American story lives with so many Americans. I mean, millions of us across the country. I mean, we don't get on TV, we don't do podcasts, but we go out there, we come here with very little, and then we find ourselves in this middle class, we find ourselves in a position that we can give hope to other people, find that we can actually support in other ways the things that we could not have done when we were younger. This is the American way, the American dream. What we have to recognize is when we are blessed, recognize, number one, where it comes from. There was something that just in our class, somebody was asking, what is true happiness? What does happiness come from? And one of the things in our primary songs is such a simple verse, but it says everything, and it answers that question about happiness. And it says count your many blessings, count them one by one, count your many blessings, see what God has done. And it goes in that process. It's such a simple phrase that our little 3, 4, 5, 6-year-olds can learn. But it comes down to this: if you do that, you can be alive for decades, and you look back on life and realize, guess what? It's been a great journey because I learned to count my blessings. It's a muscle memory. And so whatever we go through, as long as we know there's a North Star in our lives, a place where we can do the right things, do the best we can. We have a God in heaven that loves us, that will forgive us when we make our mistakes. As we continue to learn and continue to humble ourselves, continue to serve, then we will, at the end of that lifetime, say, what a remarkable journey it was. Perfect journey done by a perfect God. And I learned all my lessons because of not only good times, but more importantly, through the bad times. That's when you really get that humble spirit of figuring out what I need to do to change, because it's not working right now. So
an attitude of gratitude we talk about all the time. And I do want to also mention, because we are in a different space now, the only temple on the East Coast when we were growing up was the Washington, D.C. temple. I know, Steve, we've been talking about the Manhattan temple. There's so many down the coast, but Philadelphia. But when we were raised, when we were growing up in the 80s, 90s, it was just the Washington, D.C. temple. And so when my dad says he drove 5 hours from Brooklyn, that was the only option. Either you didn't go or you drove 5 hours one way. And so I do want to also just kind of point out, Dad, that you've never, during the trials, we have decisions to make. And we can decide to be a victim and sit and feel sorry for ourselves, or we can decide to be victorious and to have faith. And whatever that faith looks like for you all of my life, but especially during those dark times, you were like, I'm going to get in the car, I'm going to go to the temple, I'm going to set my alarm, wake up at 5:30 in the morning and read, and always have that attitude of gratitude, not saying, God, why me? But saying, I'm going to push forward because this is for my good. And I'm just grateful that I was raised with that attitude, because life hits you hard, but to know that there is a bigger plan and there's a reason why, I think just says so much. And then you can look back and say, oh, that's why that happened. That's why I was in Brooklyn doing all these things and happened to run into somebody on a Saturday at the temple, 5-hour drive, so different time. I mean, he could have been there 3 hours before, and he lived right in Long Island.
He lived in Long Island. We lived in Brooklyn and hadn't seen him for a year. And I'll say this, and Steve, just keep this in mind. Everybody who's listening, there's certain things we do that we've become really good at. What you're doing right now on your podcast, you can do things just instantaneous because you don't have to think about it. You've done it enough, it becomes habit. I call it muscle memory. Mm-hmm. The best muscle memory each and every one of us can have, it doesn't matter where we are, what our background, what our faith is to always be thankful. Always count your blessings. If that is your first thing that comes, even when things get tough, you're going to find a way to find something positive out of that tough time and say, it could have been worse. It could have been worse than this. And some way you can make it through that. Later on, you look at, my goodness, the decision I made was because I knew it was going to come out of it. I never lost hope. And that is what faith gives us, by the way. It doesn't matter, again, where we find our faith, how we worship our God. As long as it keeps us hopeful, then we take that next step, before you know, we can actually look back and give other people the most powerful 9 words you can give them. If I can do it, you can do it. So it is kind of the way it works. And I'm just so thankful, again, for Todd and Kathy, for the opportunity to be with the Raiders at the right time for 3 years. I had a chance to experience this, have this remarkable friendship, for the struggles, the fails I had, that I had a chance to test my faith and figure out, can I make it through this? Can I stay focused? Can I continue to count my blessings? And coming out of that, realizing the blessings just keep adding on if you just keep those good habits.
Wow, this has been a remarkable story. I just have to, it begs the question just a little bit, because obviously you're a U.S. congressman, and I just want you to talk about your experience serving the constituents of your district, and what it's been like for you to be a congressman when you had swore you would never, ever enter politics. Talk about what made you decide to get in politics, and then just talk about how your experience has been serving in a very extraordinarily tumultuous time in American history. Yes. And as well.
It is. Keep in mind, again, one part of my decision when I left back in '83 was I felt it was time now to give a message, to find a way to give a message to my race that I saw we were losing. The environment that we were growing up with. So this business was supposed to do that. Years later, decades later, I found myself in Utah, and I finally found something that I thought was it. What I really was trying to do when I left the NFL back in '83, I started a nonprofit called Second Chance for Youth, and actually Summur was part of that because she had heard me throughout the years talk about this. So I started that program, working with at-risk kids coming out of the juvenile system, and I really thought that was going to be my swan song. Let's put everything into it. Well, I found out a couple of years later that I came to the realization, if we don't change things in DC, our kids do not have a chance. If they can't read and write, if they don't know our history, if they don't have faith, if they can't read and write, first of all, they'll never find God, period. They just can't do that without being able to read and understand that. And they need to understand our history so they can have confidence and believe in who we are. So I realized the only way to do that was to be there where we can change laws. And it just so happens that here in my district, it opened up. It was the only district that a Republican was not being represented. So I decided to go for it. And I'll be honest with you, it wasn't an easy decision. I said no for so many years that it took me a couple of years, a couple of weeks of going to the temple, pray, fast, the whole process. And the answer I came up with was a little simple. If it's meant to be, it's going to work out. If it's not, it'll work out okay. You still continue to work with the kids. So that's where I entered the race. I'll say this, I'm so thankful that I made that decision. I got the answer that I did, because now the things I'm doing, I'm on the Education and Workforce Committee. I'm the chair of the Higher Education Subcommittee. Now, what that means is I have a chance across our country to put in policies to work with states to make sure every child can read and write. Every child can have their civil rights of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, because if you're not educated, it's impossible to get there. You can't think, you don't know how to articulate yourself, you don't know how to be kind to people when you don't feel good about yourself. So we're doing things now, and because of this progression, that the dream I had back in 82, that I never ever thought I'd do something like I'm doing, I can actually do it and make a big difference. I'm thankful to be here at this time. I would say I would probably be very frustrated if I was here earlier. We are at a point now, Steve, where all our country, we're talking the same language. We're trying to figure out how can we make sure our kids are safe. How can we make sure our kids are educated? How can I make sure that my businesses, I can run it and know that it will not be somebody coming in 23, 4 times to take things out. So we're having a conversation, no matter what side that I was sitting on, that we want to have life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. We want to have our faith. We want to have our family safe. We want to have an education for our kids. We want to open up business. We want to do that. And because we're talking this similar language, we're gonna navigate our way through this. As tough as it is, we're going to figure out a way as we the people to make sure that we can get ourselves to the next phase. And that's what we do best. So I'm excited about being there at this particular time in the greatest state, in the greatest district, seriously, that allows me to be who I am and not have to navigate and do nuance. I can be who I am and just go back and represent what I really grew up in many, many years ago.
That is fantastic. And Summur, I just want to thank you so much for extending the invitation to your father and having him to come on. And you're a very busy man and want to be respectful of your time. I just have one last political question, and then I'd like for you to maybe, and Summur, if you have any questions, then we can wrap it up. But are you a member of the Congressional Black Caucus?
No, I'm not.
Okay. How do you get along? Because obviously people say you're a Republican and you're a Black man.
Yeah.
How do you get along with other African-American members of Congress who are also Democrats? Are you able to work with them on things?
I can work. There's a couple guys I can work with as long as they believe in the same 4 tenets I talked about. There are people, believe it or not, do not believe in those tenets. They vote against it. They talk against it. We have a few people we call the squad is right now very anti-Israel. So of course, I'm not going to. There's going to be a very little room we can find to talk about because we have a little bit in common. But then there's a young man out of Brooklyn. I'm sorry, out of New York, Richie. Solid Democrat. Have so much respect for him because of his commitment to education, his commitment to Israel. There's Henry Graysar, who is a Democrat down in Texas. We have a remarkable relationship because we believe in a safe border. We believe in so-called DCA, the traveling back and forth. So it's all about relationships. You find the people you can have good relationships with, that you like each other, even though you might not agree on everything, but you have the same core values, faith. You want our country to be more successful. You want to come together, not divided. And those what we're finding. I'm hoping as we get into this new election cycle that the Democratic Party can send more of those kind of guys, that we can actually have these conversations because we have more in common than not. We've always found a way to become a better country because we have such variance of views. And I'm excited about the guys that I have a chance to work with on the other side of the aisle.
Summur?
I do want to just say on a political note, I think, especially before my dad got into politics, bipartisanship, right, is such a buzzword. But going to DC and seeing, because I do work for my father's campaign, on the campaign side, I've realized it is just a word. What my dad is talking about of we need to find that core values. I mean, if one person is pro-Israel, if one person is pro-education, let's find that common ground. But I do think people want to say, well, let's be bipartisan, bipartisan. There's no such thing as bipartisan if we can't find that common ground. And unfortunately, there are people who you will just never agree with. And that is something that is in our lives. It's not just in politics. And so if you're at home and there's somebody that you say, you know, I can respect that person, but there's no way we could sit down and have lunch because we're just too different. We can't expect our politicians to do that, but we can't expect our politicians to say, I'm representing my district, I'm representing our core values, and I will find those same people across the aisle and on our side of the aisle that have those same core values. So I just want to say that I do think the media plays a lot into this, well, we need to be bipartisan, and just wants to kind of sow that dissension, knowing that there are just some people that you're just not going to agree with, and that's okay. That is something that my dad has taught me. His favorite phrase growing up was, I'll just agree to disagree. I agree to disagree. When I grew up, I would see my dad speaking to people who completely disagree with him politically, and they would walk away friends. It was not a big deal. I'm thinking of Jack Kolka, dad, in Long Island, but you would talk to them for hours, and it would be passionate, but there'd be no raised voices, things like that. So we can agree to disagree. We can agree that there are some bridges that may not be ever crossed, but there are a lot of people that I know my dad does work with on the other side of the aisle. He mentioned a couple here, because we always have to find that common ground. I personally am not one that likes to agree to disagree. I think that I want to argue until you agree to agree with me, but it is a good thought we should be able to be in a space where we say, it's okay. We don't have to agree, but we should at least respect each other's views and try to find that common ground. And Dad, I just want to say I'm very proud, because I don't think people don't see the other side, but there have been some great bridges that we have been able to mend and get things passed that may not be as sexy as some of the things the media wants to put out there, but it's happening. And there is a lot of respect that we do have for a lot of the Democrats, a lot of the independents, a lot of the Republicans. So I just kind of want to put that out there.
Let me just say this, Steve, as we wrap this up. I have faith in the American DNA. It's a very unique. It's very unique. It's intergenerational. It's sometimes hard for us to understand what it looks like, but it's based on freedom. It's based on a vision that our kids are going to have a better life than we have. Every generation has felt this way. It's based on the fact that we'll give our lives up for our next generation happily, because we understand that that's God's way. And our DNA is based on the fact we're faithful culture. And of all faith, that's what I love about it. All these different faiths, we have a belief in a God that says, you know what, if you treat people right, if you do things honestly, it will pay off in the end. And if that's in our DNA, then what's happening in our country right now, looking around, we're seeing all this craziness going on. We're going to have more serious conversation for people who in the past have not agreed on very much. But we'll find those areas that we will agree on. And that's going to allow us to say, finally, you know what? It's not such a bad guy after all. We can have fun on this area. And then hopefully we'll get back to things like football, military, things that are based surely on meritocracy, that those areas say, allows us to forget the differences and come together and have fun together. So that's what I think was where we're heading off to. I'm excited about that process for sure.
Well, this was great. Well, Congressman, thank you so much for joining us today. Folks, I'd like to hear your comments. What did you think? I remember when I had Summur on my program and you talked about your father, Summur, there were a lot of people who said, look, I was very critical and I didn't really care for your dad. But after hearing about the kind of the way you were raised and the values you were taught,
Yeah.
even these people who are critics of yours said, I've learned to respect the congressman. So I want to say this is really important. In many ways, people are learning to respect you, sir, because of the result of your wonderful daughter, who's also my wonderful co-host, Summur. And it really, honestly, it is a testament to you and your legacy more importantly, is your family and your children. And that really is what speaks louder than anything, whether you are Republican, Democrat, liberal, independent, whatever. Just look at the fruits as well. And let's not go by just how somebody votes. Let's look at their life in its totality.
Can I leave you, Steve, with a real quick Raider story on that note?
Sure.
Okay. The thing about the Raiders, particularly year we won, we were underdogs. We just let a lot of the key players go. About 13 of us came in, and it was a year in which we had to really start coming together, and where we decided whatever our talents were, we're going to put the very best on the field, and just not let the rest of the team down. And that led us to being Super Bowl champions, Super Bowl 15. What I see what you're doing and everyone else out there, we have talents, each and every one of us, something that we've been gifted, something that we're passionate about, something that we like to share, and we're rewarded for that. If every one of us decides it's time for us to get off the sideline, get out of the stands, bring that talent, whatever it is, whatever perspective it comes, bring it to the field and give our very best, our country wins. And that's really what we're doing now. So I want to thank you again, Steve, for what you do to bring us all together, to have these different conversations. We might not agree on everything, but we can at least have this conversation. And that's what America's all about. So everyone is listening. Let's do that. Whatever your talent is, even if it's just to help somebody bring a smile to the face, if that's your talent, let's use it. But we need to bring it on and make this happen so our country starts to begin to become what we've always been projected to become a more perfect union for sure.
All right, folks. Well, leave your comments. Tell us what you think. I thought this was a remarkable conversation, and we get to hear from the congressman who represents Salt Lake City, essentially, in the U.S. House of Representatives, and to hear his unique and wonderful and awesome story. And a man of integrity, a decent man, a man who has core values and a North Star. So tell me, what is your North Star? Leave that in the comments as well. What are your guiding principles? And everything like that. So just a reminder, there's going to be links in the description for those of you who'd like to financially support the channel. Don't forget MormonBookReviews.com, where we have our wonderful merch store, where we have hats and t-shirts and all sorts of things. And remember, the most important thing is this: all the voices of the restoration will be heard here on Mormon Book Reviews.